The year is 200 CE, and Emperor Septimius Severus has just issued a decree that will end one of Rome's most controversial spectacles: women fighting as gladiators in the arena. But for those already bound by the gladiatorial oath, the Sacramentum Gladiatorium, the emperor's ban offers no escape. They remain property of their owners, and the penalty for refusing to fight has always been the same, regardless of gender. What awaited these women was not mercy, but something far worse than the combat they sought to avoid. Female gladiators, known as gladiatrices or sometimes ludia, represented a peculiar intersection of Roman entertainment, social transgression, and gender anxiety. While male gladiators embodied martial virtue and became objects of admiration despite their low social status, female gladiators provoked a more complicated response. They were simultaneously fascinating and deeply unsettling to Roman sensibilities, performing a role that violated every expectation of proper feminine behavior while drawing massive crowds eager to witness the spectacle. Imperial decree and the rise of female gladiators. Female gladiators first appeared in significant numbers during the 1st century CE, though their existence likely predates our earliest reliable records. The Roman satirist Juvenal, writing in the early 2nd century, expressed his disgust in caustic verse, asking what modesty could be expected from a woman who wears a helmet and rejects her own sex. The poet Statius, attending games sponsored by Emperor Domitian in 89 CE, described women fighting in the arena with shields and swords, their torsos bared, striking poses that made the crowd both cheer and recoil. Archaeological evidence confirms what the poets described. A marble relief discovered in Halikarnassus, modern-day Bodrum in Turkey, depicts two female gladiators named Amazon and Achillea. The inscription records that both fought bravely and were granted missio, honorable release from the match. The relief shows them armed with gladius swords and rectangular shields, their equipment identical to male gladiators of the provocator class. Other artifacts, including oil lamps and figurines, depict women in gladiatorial armor, suggesting these combats were common enough to inspire mass-produced memorabilia. What drove women into the arena varied dramatically. Some were slaves or criminals, forced into combat as punishment or entertainment. Others were freed women or even freeborn citizens, driven by debt, thrill-seeking, or the intoxicating promise of fame. The gladiatorial schools, known as ludi, occasionally trained women alongside men, though they typically fought in separate bouts. These female gladiators endured the same brutal regimen as their male counterparts. Endless training with wooden weapons, strict dietary control, and the constant shadow of death. Training began before dawn and continued until dusk, building muscle memory through repetition until the sword became an extension of the arm. The lanista, the gladiator trainer and owner, held absolute authority over his fighters. When a woman signed the gladiatorial oath or was forced into service, she surrendered all autonomy. The oath's words were uncompromising. I will endure to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. Gender offered no exemption from this vow. The contract bound the gladiator's body and life to their owner, who could profit from their victories, loan them to other promoters, or sell them like livestock. The lanista calculated every investment. Food, medical care, training time, all measured against potential profit from victories or death in the arena. Emperor Augustus, despite his efforts at moral reform, allowed female gladiators to perform during his reign, though he relegated them to less prominent positions in the program. Later, emperors took varying stances. Tiberius banned women of senatorial rank from fighting in 19 CE, revealing that even aristocratic women had been entering the arena. The historian Tacitus recorded that the Senate had been forced to pass legislation forbidding women of senatorial or equestrian family from becoming gladiators or actresses, two professions Romans considered equally degrading. Nero actively encouraged female gladiators, featuring them prominently in his spectacles. Suetonius records that Nero presented combats between women at his games, finding particular amusement in forcing noble women to perform in degrading spectacles. Domitian continued this tradition, staging torchlit nighttime fights between female gladiators that became notorious for their theatrical excess. The emperor would sometimes order these women to fight dwarves, creating grotesque parodies of traditional gladiatorial combat that delighted some spectators while disgusting others. The refusal to kill and the Senate's wrath. The moment of truth in any gladiatorial match came when one fighter gained decisive advantage over the other. The defeated gladiator would signal surrender by raising a finger, appealing to the editor, the sponsor of the games, for mercy. In the Imperial box or the editor's seat, a decision would be made. Missio, allowing the defeated to live, or the command to finish the match with a fatal blow. For gladiators who had sworn the oath, refusing to deliver that killing stroke when ordered constituted the gravest transgression. When a female gladiator refused to kill her defeated opponent, she violated not just the rules of the arena, but the sacred oath that bound her. The crowd's reaction would have been immediate and vicious. Romans attended the games expecting blood and resolution. A fighter who showed what they perceived as cowardice or inappropriate mercy disrupted the spectacle and cheated spectators of the death they had paid to witness. The editor faced a choice. Allow this defiance to stand and risk undermining the game's authority, or make an example that would ensure no other gladiator dared follow suit. The crowd would chant their demands, thousands of voices unified in bloodlust, drowning out any plea for mercy. The punishment for such refusal was never officially codified in surviving legal texts, but practical reality left no ambiguity. A gladiator who refused to fight forfeited the protections of their status. They were no longer a competitor in a regulated contest, but a condemned criminal. Their fate was sealed the moment they lowered their weapon. Guards would surround the defiant fighter, disarm her, and drag her from the arena floor. What followed depended on the editor's imagination and the crowd's bloodlust, but mercy was never among the options. The transition from gladiator to condemned happened in seconds, the change in legal status as swift as the fall of a blade. For female gladiators, the refusal to kill carried additional layers of meaning in Roman eyes. Romans already viewed female gladiators as unnatural, women who had rejected their proper roles as wives and mothers. When such a woman then refused to kill, she confirmed every prejudice. She was weak, she was foolish, she lacked the virtues, the masculine courage that might have redeemed her transgression of gender norms. The satirist Juvenal's contempt for female gladiators stemmed partly from this perceived contradiction. They claimed masculine privilege by entering the arena, but retained feminine weakness when violence demanded completion. Historical records preserve glimpses of what happened to gladiators, male and female, who defied the arena's demands. The emperor's power over life and death in the arena was absolute. When Commodus served as both emperor and gladiator, he personally executed those who displeased him, using his position to transform judicial punishment into personal entertainment. Other emperors granted Lanistae the authority to punish defiant gladiators as they saw fit, knowing the example would reinforce discipline across all gladiatorial schools. The economic calculation also mattered. A gladiator represented significant investment in training and equipment, but a defiant gladiator was worse than worthless. They actively damaged the Lanista's reputation and reduced the value of other fighters under the same ownership. Making an example of the defiant gladiator through public, brutal punishment served to protect the Lanista's remaining investments. Fear kept the others obedient. Public executions as warnings against defiance. The execution of defiant female gladiators typically occurred during the midday interval of the games, the period traditionally reserved for ad bestias executions and other forms of capital punishment. While morning featured animal hunts and afternoon brought prestigious gladiatorial matches, midday belonged to the damned. This was when criminals, prisoners of war, and those who had forfeited all rights faced death in forms designed to entertain the departing lunch crowd and those arriving early for the afternoon's main events. A female gladiator who refused to fight might be stripped of her armor and dragged into the arena wearing only a tunic or stripped of all covering. The Romans used nudity as part of the punishment, stripping away dignity along with clothing. She would be bound to a stake at the arena's center or chained to a platform that prevented escape. Then the animals would be released. Leopards, bears or lions, deliberately starved to make them aggressive. The condemned would have no weapons, no means of defense, only the awareness of what approached. The beasts would circle first, testing while the crowd roared encouragement. The wait could stretch for minutes or hours, psychological torture preceding physical destruction. The poet Martial, writing during the Flavian dynasty, described numerous ad bestias executions in his Book of Spectacles, celebrating the creative cruelty of these deaths. While his verses focused primarily on male criminals, the mechanics of execution remained identical, regardless of the victim's gender. The crowd's entertainment derived from watching the condemned's futile attempts to avoid the inevitable, the animal's predatory stalking, and the eventual moment when teeth and claws found their mark. Some executions incorporated theatrical elements, transforming punishment into mythological reenactment. A defiant female gladiator might be cast as Dirce, the mythological queen tied to a bull and dragged to death, or as one of the Danaids condemned to eternal punishment for murdering their husbands. These spectacles satisfied Roman audiences' desire for both justice and entertainment, wrapping brutal punishment in the legitimizing cloak of cultural reference. Costumes were prepared, props constructed, and the condemned forced to play their role in a grotesque performance. The crowd appreciated the cleverness of matching crime to mythological punishment, finding entertainment in the intellectual exercise even as they watched real death unfold. Another form of execution involved forcing the condemned to fight against impossible odds. A woman who refused to kill one opponent might be thrust back into the arena facing multiple armed fighters with only a wooden sword or dagger. The outcome was predetermined, but the spectacle lay in watching her realize escape was impossible, in observing how long she could survive against trained killers instructed to prolong her death for maximum entertainment value. They would wound her methodically, avoiding fatal strikes, giving the crowd time to appreciate each blow. Blood would pool in the sand as she weakened, each desperate parry slower than the last, until finally the wooden weapon fell from nerveless fingers and the real swords finished what had been ordained from the moment she defied her oath. Burning alive was reserved for specific crimes under Roman law, including arson, magic, and violations of the Vestal Virgin's chastity. But ad hoc executions in the arena followed no consistent legal framework. A defiant gladiator might be burned as additional humiliation, especially if the editor wished to send a particularly memorable message. The condemned would be tied to a stake, wood piled around them, and set ablaze while the crowd watched. Some victims were coated in pitch or oil to make them burn more slowly and brightly, extending suffering while improving visibility for distant spectators. The flames would climb gradually, smoke choking before fire consumed, and the crowd would count the minutes until the screaming stopped. Attendants stood ready with long poles to push the body back into the flames if it fell forward, ensuring complete destruction. Crucifixion, though typically reserved for slaves and enemies of the state, could be adapted for arena execution. The condemned might be nailed to a cross, erected in the sand, left to die slowly while other events continued around them. This method had the advantage of maintaining visibility throughout the day's program, serving as an ongoing reminder of the consequences of defiance, while other gladiators fought in the shadow of the dying. Historical records mention specific cases that likely included female gladiators among the condemned, though sources rarely specify gender when describing mass executions. During the inauguration of the Colosseum under Emperor Titus in 80 CE, 9,000 animals were killed alongside countless condemned criminals over 100 days of continuous spectacles. Some of those criminals undoubtedly included defiant gladiators, male and female, who had refused their roles in earlier games. Emperor Septimius Severus's ban on female gladiators in 200 CE ended the phenomenon of women fighting in the arena, but it did not grant freedom to those already enslaved in the system. The ban's language focused on preventing new recruitment, not liberating existing gladiatresses. Women who had signed the oath or been forced into service remained bound to their contracts. Their owners could no longer exhibit them as gladiators, but they could exploit them in other ways, as slaves in households, brothels, or mines. Some Lannistae, facing the loss of their investment in female fighters, may have sold them to brothel owners or sentenced them to ad bestias executions to recoup costs through final performances. The transition period saw a spike in female executions as owners liquidated assets that could no longer generate profit through combat. The few female gladiators who survived to see Severus's ban faced impossible choices. Freedom required paying off their contracts, an impossibility for most. Running away meant death if captured. Staying meant accepting whatever new degradation their owners devised. For women who had tasted the arena's twisted form of glory, however brutal, returning to conventional slavery must have felt like its own form of death. Some chose suicide over the alternatives, taking control of their ends in the only way remaining to them. Others disappeared into the Empire's vast network of brothels and labor camps, their gladiatorial past becoming a shameful secret never spoken aloud. Archaeological evidence of individual female gladiators ends abruptly in the early 3rd century, coinciding with Severus's decree. The oil lamps, the figurines, the relief carvings all stop. Either the practice truly ended, or it went underground, hidden from official record. Either way, the women who had fought as gladiators vanished from history, their fates unrecorded beyond the general knowledge that Roman slaves faced brutal exploitation and early death. The amphitheaters where these women fought still stand, monuments to Roman engineering and Roman cruelty. The Colosseum's sand, stained by thousands of deaths, absorbed the blood of female gladiators who fought, refused, and died. The Hippodrome, the underground chambers beneath the arena floor, held the animals and prisoners who would emerge through trapdoors to kill or be killed. Walking these spaces today, visitors see the mechanisms of spectacle, the elevators, the tunnels, the holding cells. But the screams have faded, the blood has dried, and the names of individual victims have been lost. The Roman crowds who cheered these executions believed they were witnessing justice, the necessary punishment of those who violated sacred oaths and disrupted social order. Modern eyes see only cruelty, the systematic dehumanization of people transformed into entertainment. But perhaps the most disturbing truth is how ordinary these horrors were to those who inflicted them. For Rome, this was simply another